So if you are joining us, yeah, just that when I thought we are going incognito, I'm told recording in progress, but it's all right. It's all right, Dr. Martin. You did the thing. So
Just in case.
again, ladies and gentlemen, let's just start breaking down these conversations to ensure that we are getting it right. And we might be having some startling effect on the call, but we're hoping that once that is resolved, we'll be able to take care of that. Dr. Martin, once again, karibu sana. You are a leader within your own rights. You have worked with the Kenyan community when it comes to elections. And the IEBC is currently working on enhanced continuous voter registration. I want to take your very quick comments on that before we can even dive deeper into it. Karibu.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is an exercise that the IEBC kicked off towards the beginning of this year. And in fact, this March, they're targeting quite a number of voters to register. And we are seeing the early signs that, yes, there's an attempt to make sure that people register. Especially what we are seeing out there is the young voters who are very keen to register. So if you look at the strategic importance, it is important that this exercise is done. However, we are seeing a little bit of some slowness in some areas. There are specific challenges that I think the diaspora can take note, especially when we look at IEBC kits which are not working in specific counties. We are seeing there's a little bit of training going on at the same time. Voter registration enhancement is also going on. But having said that, there is some signs that we are seeing, especially from the youth. And as you rightly said, Tuko Kadi seems to be the momentum. And let's not forget that the Kenyan youth are one of the most, what you call, clever, savvy youth that we've ever seen, not even just in Africa, but globally. And when you look at the Tuko Kadi movement or initiative, it's not really a top-down movement as we know it, whereby you have somebody who influences people to go and register. This is actually through peer-to-peer. So they are actually agents of their own movement. And that is a very unique thing that we are seeing today, because if you look at the target that the IBC had of making sure that they can register up about 2.5 million people whom they want to register, we've seen some figures. Some of them are encouraging, especially in some of the counties. We've seen some of the counties, especially in Nyanza, leading in terms of the rate of registration. We saw a very huge surge during the beginning of the registration at some point. But having
Yeah.
said that, we are seeing that this is a positive way to do it. When it comes to the people registering, that is one thing. The issue also is how will they vote? And during the day of voting, and then that is also another issue that needs to be looked at. But in general, there are positive signs, especially in preparation. There's some systems that need to be enhanced, especially when we talk about the KIMS kit that is taking the biodata. They need to make sure that they are up and running. And then, of course, we need more staff to make sure that people can be able to be registered at any time. There's been cases where the areas of registrations have had idling staff. People are not going there. So there need to be some more enhancement in terms of making sure that everybody is sensitized to go and register. And also, when it comes to diasporians, we know we have a responsibility for every one diaspora. There's almost like 100 people they can influence. So again, that should be able to count in doing so. But in general, there's a slow progression, but it's improving, but we could do much, much better.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. You talk about doing much better and the progression that has happened, but we cannot fail to also recognize the work that has happened over the years. Remember, you and I do share some common, what I would say, common characters when it comes to our rights to vote. And one of the biggest issue has been the issue of the diaspora vote. Talking and speaking from the perspective of a diaspora leader who is based in the UK, and I'm a member of a diaspora technical working group, which is a very interesting group, and probably at a later stage we'll talk about it. What for you can you guarantee us the wins that we have seen so far when it comes to our rights to exercise this very important constitutional exercise?
Yeah, when you look at our constitution, it actually gives us a very clear power that we are meant to exercise our right to vote. And that is a right that is enshrined in the Constitution for every Kenyan, wherever they are.
Yeah.
Having said that, there were specific issues that we needed to tackle in the diaspora, because when you look at the apathy of voting in 2022, you will
Yeah.
see that just nearly over 10,000 diasporians actually cast their vote. And that is not the number of diasporians who are out here. The numbers are always counted to be roughly between 4.5 or to 5 or to 6 million diasporans. So even with those conservative numbers, it then gives you the sense that there has to be more that needs to be done in order for diasporans to vote.
Yeah.
When we looked at this issue, especially in the context of the Diaspora Technical Working Group, we came across a number of issues. So first of all, there was the issue around, do we have enough polling stations that can enable the many diasporians that we know are out here to actually cast their vote?
Yeah.
And the quick answer for that one was that we didn't have enough. Although in 2022, we had roughly about 12 polling stations or polling centers in different countries, in 12 countries, this was not good enough when you look at the statistics that are out there. So, for example, when you take just Africa, for example, you'll find that even a country like Mozambique, where you have a number of Kenyan diasporians, did not have a polling station. So, if you come to Europe and you look at even a country like Germany, which only had Berlin as a voting station or a polling station or a polling center, you needed to have at least another polling center or a polling station in a city like, for example, Frankfurt, which is the financial capital of Europe, so to say, or the EU, so to say. And you find that there are so many other countries like France, like Spain. When you go to the Scandinavian, we know that the Kenyan embassy right now has consulate, actually has an embassy in Denmark, which is a very welcomed move. But again, initially, all those Scandinavian countries used to go all the way to Sweden so that they could
Yeah.
either exercise if they wanted passports or if they wanted IDs, that is the office that they needed to go to. And for voting, there was no any other voting place around there. So the skewness of where to vote, Australia is even more of a challenge because you find Australia is huge. But again, it's only in Canberra where there was a voting place, or that's where the embassy is. So we really need to make sure that we expand the voting or polling stations where we can. US is one of the biggest challenge because you find that it's expansive, the cities are far. So if you only have Los Angeles and then you only have New York and Washington, that might not be enough to only have 3 polling stations within a big continental area such as the US and even Canada. Therefore, the argument of having an increase in polling station became very critical. The second point is also to look at the cost.
Yeah.
To be fair, participation in election should be free and fair, as they say in the
A
Constitution.
very elusive word when it comes
Yeah,
to
it's free and fair and
yeah.
even transparency. But you find it's never free for us because you have to spend. We did actually some statistics, and when you look at just the statistics of the cost of travel
Yeah.
in the US, and we looked at somebody traveling maybe from Texas all the way to either Los Angeles or maybe going all the way to New York or going all the way to Washington, D.C. On average, you will spend roughly about just slightly above 150,000 Kenyan shilling. And that's only one person to go to an embassy and then come back. So you're talking about going to, first of all, register, which
Yeah.
you have to do, and then come back to your home, go back for verification, which you have to do, and then come back to your home, and then go back to voting. So on average, if you're talking about a family of even 4, where you have 2 parents and 2 children, or you have maybe 2 parents, or even one particular person, the cost is quite exorbitant. So therefore, cost became a critical factor in trying to really convince and see how this can be mitigated. Then the other issue is the skewness of the voting points with the concentration of diasporians. We know where we are because we know where there's a high number of the concentration of diasporans in terms of where they live. And therefore, to put a polling station far from where they live becomes, again, a very prohibitive issue. And that's why that number of 10,000 is what it is because it is the cost that is very high, and therefore we can't make it to this distance. It is even more challenging in the conservative countries, such as in the Gulf. You'll find that some people cannot be allowed to leave their residence to go and even exercise that right. So therefore, we need to have a way around this, where maybe mobile units can be provided for registration to enable as many people to register within the diaspora to look at what is happening. And then finally, when you look at the budget that has been put forward by the IEBC, you would find that they never had a budget allocation for this particular period. So actually in 2025, 2026, there is no allocation.
And that is in respect to the diaspora.
Yes, exactly. So if you look at, I think it was one of the items, and I remember very well that budget that had been released by the IEBC, which was presented to Parliament, item number 27, which talks about diaspora voting and activities. You'll find that there's no allocation in 2025, 2026, but there's allocation from 2026, 2027, and 2027, 2028. So you find that again, the allocation of the amount of money there is also another issue. So to compound the whole issue, within the technical working group, we have a petition which we went to court to make sure that we can be heard, to put this issue that actually boils down to the interpretation of who or how the IEBC decides where voting takes place. So if you look at the regulation, they will talk about the voting. Of course, there's an issue around the countries in the diaspora that should be with the Kenyan embassy, or at least there's some relationship with Kenya government. But more importantly, voting can only take place, according to their interpretation, in a high commission, an embassy, or a consulate. Our argument is that that shouldn't hold because you can have a relationship with the Kenyan government as a country in the diaspora. A country can have a relationship with the Kenyan government. And even if it might not have a consulate in that particular area, like for example, some of the Scandinavian countries, like if you go to Finland or if you go to Norway, diasporans are told you can go to Sweden and get your documents. So there's already a relationship that has already been created. We want polling stations to be stationed in those particular countries which have at least the presence or a relationship with the Kenyan government. So that is the fight, to expand that constituent of voting. And that's where we are.
Interesting perspectives. In fact, you are able to enumerate some of the biggest challenges that the diaspora community has faced. And among them includes the aspect of distance. You go about to the costing when you are looking at the family, for example, the family size do come into consideration. And Martin, the biggest issue, and sorry, I just eliminated a very important title, Dr. Martin.
No, just call me Martin, I'm good.
When you talk really about the issue of the elections being free, you are basing this on different understanding and interpretation of what IEBC and of course Parliament of the day has been able to interpret this specific word in the Constitution. Would you be of a different opinion in terms of costing? When you look at Kenya in comparison to other countries across the region, that is in our region, in our area, that is East African region, Kenya happens to be one of the countries that has the highest cost of an individual casting their ballot. What exactly informs this, Martin?
Yeah, your argument is actually correct in the sense that when we were putting our arguments in our petition, which is still a matter of the courts at the moment, we were basing on some specific examples. And we went across the board to make sure that we relate this issue with what is happening. So if you take even our neighbors, Rwanda, and I know the Rwandese who will be listening and Kenyans in Rwanda will agree, I think Rwanda has done quite a bit in terms of expanding the diasporan voting polls using very, very, very effective methods that are not as costly as what we see. And sometimes we are left in a lot of, not anguish, but you would wonder, what is it that is so exorbitant when it comes to Kenyan's elections that is so costly? Of course, you'd understand that it needs the technology that is being used. There is the human capacity and the human resource that is required. There are also issues about contractual agreements with whoever is running this particular show. So these issues are acceptable, but we would really have to go back to the basics of what is it that we require in the diaspora. So if you look at areas such as the cost that is incurred by IEBC, we've discussed with IEBC, and very soon, and as you are aware, we are going to have what we call an IEBC diaspora dialogue, and this is something that is in the works at the moment. I'm sure
Correct.
you have seen some flyers going around where we hope that this dialogue, which is actually scheduled for the 14th of May,
Yeah.
2026, we shall be able to discuss, and it's open for diaspora. We'll come back to that. But this dialogue is really meant to set the pace and the tone of how we can be able to sensitize the IEBC to understand collectively the problems and challenges that we face. And one of them is the one that you've said about the cost. So when you look at how much do we spend on average in
Yeah.
terms of us going to vote, I gave you a figure of the US. It was roughly
Yeah.
about 175,000 Kenya shillings to just to spend to move from one point to the other. We do that with the latest data that we could get for air flights, and also on average taking into account accommodation and so forth. In the UK, for example, where I am, I know people from Scotland, Northern Ireland, who were able to travel whether by train or by air would spend on an average between 70 to 100,000 Kenya shillings. So you can
Yeah.
imagine that is just on average, just to come and do one transaction and go back. We've therefore argued that in order to reduce the cost, we need to look at technology, but it shouldn't be technology that replaces the KIMS kits or technology that brings more complication, but technology that can just be used to make sure that things work. For example, the only technology that was put over and above the KIMS kit or developed by the IEBC in the last general election was the booking technology. That's the only technology that had been developed, meaning you could go online and be able to reserve your appointment.
Yeah.
So that bit is the only technology that was embedded over and above the system that we have. And you and I know very well, we've got various better technologies that can be used, especially for verification. We don't mind going to the embassy or the point where we are supposed to go to give the biometric data and be registered. But when it comes to verifying that I was the person who came and registered, we don't need to move from our location to that particular point again. So that can save a significant amount of money when it
Yeah.
comes to that. The other point that we've brought out is diasporians are also skilled in their own right. So there has to be an engagement that brings to fruition the issue around collaboration with the IBC. There could
Correct.
be some specific tasks that the diaspora groups and communities can take on that can also be complemented by IEBC staff who normally fly from one point to the other to come and work. So we don't mind them sending the staff all over the world because they'll say maybe that's another cost. But we are also here with various skill sets that could help the IEBC to be able to complement and cover those particular costs, especially when it comes to civic education, when it comes to awareness. We can do either virtual, we can either do either face-to-face, we can do mobile clinics that can go from one borough to the next borough. And these are things that are very, very, very practical. The other point that I just wanted to, last point is when it comes to where can we locate a point for voting? Yes, we know as it is today, apart from what we now know, which is ongoing in court, it's only an embassy, a high commission, or a consulate where you can
Correct.
go and vote. But
Yeah.
we know diasporans have buildings, they've got social centers, they've got some even have churches that can be used if really given the information of the standard and the requirements. These venues can be used very conveniently as voting areas. Or even if you talk to the local government where the diasporians are, the local governments do vote in specific points. So those points also can be used by the Kenyan government or IEBC for this exercise. So in terms of the cost, as you rightly said earlier, we
Yeah.
can reduce that cost through technology,
So
through assimilation of diaspora resources, and also through coordination with the resident governments where the diasporans are.
Dr. Martin, I hear you, and there are things you're talking about, especially when it comes to technology and deployment of technology. Of course, we have been a bit sluggish when it comes to implementing some changes, simply because of the trust and mistrust that exists in our elections. Recently, young men were suggesting, and young people for that matter, were suggesting the issue of blockchain, for example. And right now, we just shy into the next election. The biggest issue in our elections has always been the mistrust in terms of who gets to count the vote and if the vote actually do count. What is your idea of blockchain into being embedded into our elections, and has it worked elsewhere?
Let me put it out here that the future of what we call the elections in terms of verification, efficiency, and so forth will have to be based on technology. And this is something that we have to come to terms with. I remember, and let me just give you a background here.
Yeah.
I was an agent of a political party, which we can't name, in London. And I really saw the process that takes place from when the ballots have been received in the boxes, the method of making sure that you open those boxes to count those particular ballots, to make sure that the form 34A or all those forms are filled in the way it should be before they're submitted and transmitted. That process is actually very vigorous. And if you look at the process itself, it is fairly, to be fair to IEBC, it is quite tamper-proof in terms of the verification process and how you have to do that.
Wait, Dr.
And
Martin,
even on top of that,
before we
I'm
do
coming to that. I'm coming to that. In the sense that they had put some good what you call security marks on on each of those particular papers.
Yeah.
So therefore, they had done an effort to make sure that you couldn't really throw in another piece of paper and just assume that things will go. But we are talking of human error, and we're talking of humans being the weakest point. So anything could happen. Now, looking at that particular process, it is therefore important that we try specific tests that we can. I'm aware of a very young person. I know he's been very much in the media, who has come up with a blockchain-based type of, actually they're calling it the People's IEBC. And that platform, we are examining it from a technology point of view to look at the viability of that technology. And when you look at the principle that is being applied, blockchain is a ledger. And this ledger is unique so that if one change appears at a specific point of that particular ledger, everybody who has access to that particular ledger will know and will say, okay, there's a change that has occurred. So it brings what we call the authenticity and making sure that there's a trust on the system. The other thing also it does is the scaling. We need technology to scale. If you look at India, for example, India has one of the biggest voter registrations that you can ever imagine. It was one of the big, democracy. They count these votes and they finish this counting within days, and they get even results within days. So we cannot really argue that Kenya is so unique with a population of only, we have roughly about 60 million. We've got a voter population of roughly about 20 million, maybe it's plus. And the point is that we can't really argue that voter registration population of 20, and in fact, last year, it was actually almost like 15 million of people who voted for both the presidential candidates. The point is that we can actually do better. So technology and infusing technology should be done. Now, our argument is that it should be it should be a phased approach where you have tests that are conducted. We have various elections at the county level for MCAs, or even we can do it in the diaspora here to test some of these technologies and then try and expand them. Now, when it comes to that and when it comes to the law, everybody has always shied out of technology because they will say, suppose somebody can infiltrate it, what do we do? But we can always have measures that can be able to be used to make sure that you can be able to work it out. One point that I wanted to make, which I made last year in the last general election,
Yeah.
was the Form 34 is actually what we call the DNA of the elections in Kenya. Because that form, as soon as it is filled, and then everybody, the announcement is done at the polling station. That is all what we need, because as soon as that announcement is done, that information should be open to everybody to know exactly who voted for who, because that announcement has already been done at the polling station. So even if that information reaches the what we call the central command post in Bomas of Kenya, we shall have known what that information is, and therefore we can actually tabulate and get this information out there. Some of this, well, if you look at the advanced democracies out there, it is the media that actually announces the projections
Yeah.
because they would have done their exit polls, they would have done and that always becomes it's almost they rarely get it wrong. We've seen cases where they've projected a few things which are not right, but the point is that they rarely get it wrong because they use information that is coming from those particular polling station and then collate that information in order to get this. It will be interesting to see the future.
Yeah.
And in fact, I would argue that the blockchain alternative that is being advanced by one of the young Kenyans is not necessarily the first one. We have a mobile-based voting platform, which had been introduced way back by some of my old colleagues, and I know they know who they are. So the
Yeah.
point is that the urge of having technology is not new. There are specific cases like Estonia, where they've used technology. They started with a small election, they expanded it up, and now they've actually perfected it to a larger sample. And there are also specific countries, even if you look at Mexico, for example, if you look at other countries, they've used technology to a good level. So therefore, the shortage of technology is not a problem. But one thing that I wanted to point out is when you look at our budget, so let's just take, for example, the budget item, I think it's budget item number 29 in what the IEBC had proposed, where they're talking about the KIMS kit replacement. Okay. You would have
Very
expected
interesting. Very interesting
that
budget line.
yeah, so it's budget line, I think number 29, if I remember well, where they were talking about the KIMS replacement. The
Yeah.
cost of just replacing those KIMS kit is roughly about 6 billion. Yeah, 6 billion Kenya shillings. Okay.
Yeah.
One would have thought that when they were actually procuring these KIMS kits, they would have had a way of how you could be able to use them over a longer period. There are some arguments about software has to be changed, something has to be changed. But this is where we are saying we shouldn't incur this huge amount of cost if really we think, kind of like in a holistic way of how we deploy technology. So just coming back to you, yes, technology can be a solution. It should be anchored in law. It should be something that should be argued positively, but not to be looked at negatively. And also take precaution when it comes to issues such as security and cybersecurity and all that. But the
Yeah.
point is, we need to be focusing on technology to make it easier.
You know, why I almost interrupted your presentation earlier on, Dr. Martin, and for those of you tuning in, we are speaking to Dr. Martin Koyabe. Dr. Martin Koyabe is a Kenyan who is based in the diaspora, in the UK to be specific, and he is a leader there, but also a member of the Diaspora Technical Working Group. And we are privileged to speak to him, not just because he is one of those boys who speak through the nose, but clearly he understands that an itchy nose is a dangerous one to have in a meeting. That's why we need to take care of that flu before we get into the elections. That said, are you a registered voter? And Dr. Martin, I'll surprise you because I'm just reading through an article that was published earlier on today by the local media, and it is saying that there could be a shocker because millions of Kenyan voters may need to register again. But I think we can leave that to sink in for now and cross over back to the conversation you were trying to persuade me to listen to in terms of having elections that are tamper proof. And I do agree. We have had very successful elections in 2022, especially from the diaspora perspective. One wonders, is it just that you do understand the consequences of misbehavior, and that's why probably, and in no way am I undermining the very behaved and well articulate Kenyans who do attend elections and go home. But there's the aspect of you being in diaspora and understanding chaos will bring you more chaos. Are there the dynamics that possibly you are using that as a qualification to say the elections could be seen to be tamper-proof? In short,
Um,
what role is
Actually,
area?
to be honest, any technology can be hacked in one way or the other. The idea, and this is a field that I'm specialized in, is to make it harder for a
I
would-be
mean, Dr.
hacker.
Martin, let's get this clear. I don't have a problem with the technology aspect. I have an issue with the behavior aspect because you're saying there was almost zero incidences in the areas you were because you could see from process A, B to C. But
Yeah,
then what
yes,
happened
yes.
back at home?
I'll be honest with you. If you look at and this exercise was very important for me because we can talk the talk, but
Mm,
when it comes to really what happens on the ground is where you really see what has really gone into this. And I really
mm,
want to give IEBC, and I've gone public to say that even when you look at the website of the IEBC, it had huge amount of hits. That means people going to the website to see the results. In fact, they were processing huge amount of hits per day, but there was no any hiccup of that website coming down. So if you look at the redundancy that had been put, especially from the firewalls and behind the scenes, they had done quite some good work on that one. When you look at the process of how the law has been embedded by the technology that is being used, especially in processing a voter who casts their votes, the paper that they're using to cast that particular vote, where that paper is coming from, the batch numbers that were serialized from that particular paper, the holograms that were being used in terms of the security features that were put on those particular pieces of paper,
yeah,
the idea that you could have one particular ballot that is spoiled and how you treat it at the venue where these votes are being cast, how
yeah,
you actually even close the ballot box to make sure that it is ready for
mm,
transportation from point A to B, and also making sure that you take the photograph of the final form that has been signed by all the agents and approved and those issues. So when you look at that process, and for many of us who have been in the field looking
yeah,
at exactly and even being part of that, you would say that there was quite a bit of work that has gone in to
mm,
ensure that at least the elections say what they say. Now, where we have issues, and I know some politicians have argued around it, and some progressive politicians have argued around it, is that we may not necessarily even need a coalition center in Bomas.
mm,
Bomas should just be used to announce who the winner is because all this information is already in the polling stations. Because as soon as the announcement is done at the polling station, and that data is recorded by many people, in fact, because when many people record the information, the amount of errors reduce because everybody is more likely to say what was the truth that was announced at that particular police station. So you'll always find figures that are coming out. But of course, you'd expect some process of collecting this information to take it. So if you look at Form 34B,
mm,
transformed into 34A, and then it is taken into this particular, let's say, the headquarters and Bomas of Kenya for the aggregation.
yeah,
In at that particular stage, the results should have been known on this other side. Now, coming back to technology, let me just be very brief.
yeah,
We have, of course, to put some measures. Many technologies, especially when you look at AI, which is quite a transformative technology that has come to date. There
mhm,
are many, many ways of how you could use AI to mitigate some of these issues, or you can use AI to really be the instigator, or you can actually use it for what we call the bad intentions.
yeah,
And this is something that is very possible. We're also seeing cases where when you go to electronic voting or you go to technology, you need to educate many people on how to use technology and how to make sure that their votes count. So, for example, if we are talking about voting remotely, where
mm,
somebody can press a button and vote from a specific location, there has to be a way that users are trained to do that. But these are things that we can gradually move to, whereby we give the independence of voting and put technology to be the driver, but more importantly, also put mitigations that can be verified so that if
mm,
technology fails, we have a backup system that can be used to be able to verify what was supposed to be done. Just the same way when you arrived at the polling station and your fingerprints failed, there was a
mm,
mechanism of how you could be verified as who you are, even if your fingerprint failed at the point of voting. So that's what of the verification process. And these are the mechanisms that we're talking about that can be put in place to safeguard that. But our point here is to encourage the use of technology, the innovation that Kenyans have, to
yeah,
bring this into fold, test it in specific minor, smaller elections, see how it works, and be able to embrace it as a cost saver. Because in future, for sure, we want to save cost, and we can't keep on having the 63 billion budgets that the IBC have. And with all respect, they have reasons for that.
mm.
But those kind of budgets are ballooning just because part of that, the chunk, the value, if you look at the value chain, technology could have taken care of so many other areas.
All right. I hear you, and I correctly get where you're coming from when it comes to technology. I would love for us to, move and try and discuss something more local and more connecting because you and I, again, we share some common borders. And those common borders expect us to be able to function in a certain way. There has been a conversation around 2027 and how significant it is for the Kenyan electorate, the Kenyan governance system, and probably for you as a diaspora leader and member. How can you correlate the current political temperatures, the current urgency to be involved in this very important political process, and the eventual 2027 as we look back at what happened in 2002? Any relations,
Yeah,
statistics based,
there's so
urgency?
much. In
Yes.
fact, this is very important. There's so much that, and I know diasporans who are out there who will be listening to this and even watching this right now
Mm,
will agree that there is so much that the diaspora really wants to bring on board.
mm,
It has been argued that, well, you're just a small number, you might not be significant, but on the flip side,
yeah.
there is a lot of significance when diasporans are able to participate fully. Now, remember, we are in a community that is very different. We cannot, if you look at just the way we are distributed,
Mm,
if you look at the countries where diasporans are, there's a need for having what we call a structure that can favor the population of the diasporans and enabling them to vote. One of
yeah.
the things that we've been looking at, especially in the technical working group and other forums, is to
Mm,
make sure that we give diasporians the ability to participate in the political process,
mm,
but more importantly, in the governance of our country.
mm,
This is something that cannot be shortchanged because we have the right to be part of that ecosystem.
mm,
We've also been able to articulate ourselves to say political process and governance is just not enough, but participating in the economic prosperity of the country becomes fundamental, especially when it comes to the level of investments, how we can be able to bring revenues and be able to bring value
mm,
in the country. And then also there is a third pillar, which is very important, is the cultural, the social cultural nature
yeah.
and the networks that the diaspora bring, especially to the country, which is very, very important because that also becomes one of the front lines in terms of diplomacy that we
Mm,
provide our country wherever we are. So how we carry ourselves, what we do, and how we really engage with people out here is a reflection of the country. So really, if you look at the goodwill that we are putting out there, it's enormous. Having said that,
yeah.
it is therefore important that governments look at the diaspora as a friendly, family-oriented brothers and sisters who are here not only just to come and, the way things have always been, where the trust deficit, as you rightly said, has
Mm,
always been there for years and years and years because diasporans have always been looked as the agitators, the people who
mm,
don't believe on the system, and so forth. And yet, even the people who are leading us were in the diaspora, just to the irony of it. So, the
mm,
idea that we can be able to complement and be able to do that, we need to do that. The government of the day has tried in some specific areas, but there's room for improvement. I think there's no doubt there's room for improvement,
You,
whereby
you know,
there should
you say
be.
the government of the day has tried. I wonder, were they supposed to try or were they supposed to deliver? Because I don't know. Help me out. Why do you
Yeah,
say they
okay.
have tried? In what areas are you kindly point them out?
I mean, there are specific areas
Mm.
that you could look at, especially when you compare what the promise, or, I really didn't want to go into this area, but now that you've asked me, I'll try
I
and
mean,
be very careful.
Dr.
So when you
Martin,
look
Dr.
at
Martin, let's
every,
be honest. Let's
okay,
be honest. Let's be
correct.
honest with one another. There are Kenyan diasporas who are listening to you, and you have mentioned the issue of trust deficit. They don't trust their own governments. You've mentioned leaders who have been in the diaspora who have gone home and become part and parcel of the leadership. But today, we're still probably facing some challenges that ordinarily we expect would have been sorted out. So when you say the government of the day has tried, kindly quantify the trial.
I mean, if you look at, for example, let's pick just areas where things have worked
Okay.
to a specific significant level. So if you look at the diaspora or rather State Department,
Mhm.
which we really cried for
Mm.
and we fought so hard. And I know many of us out here wanted actually a ministry. I remember we were the architects
Yeah.
of really proposing the ministry at the time.
Yeah.
Uh, the idea was very clear that that component was important.
Why
Now,
was it important?
because of the value that diaspora brings to the country, it cannot be neglected as just one off. In fact, some countries have embraced diaspora to much, much bigger, significant level than
Mm.
what we see in the country. In fact, the diaspora ministry is established. They've got diaspora structures that are funded by the government. They've got outside. And these are
Mm.
countries that have really used diaspora. If you look at China, for example, if you look at Israel, for example, if you look at even Yemen and even Lebanon, they've used their diaspora in a very, very great way. And we and Mexico, even if you look at Mexico, for example, so
Yeah.
if you go to the US, you'd find that every state has at least a Mexican area where they can go and consolidate and be able to. So if you look at these communities out here, they've used the diaspora in a very, very aggressive but more systematic way, but also with a very good view of what it is. Now,
Mm.
what we bring, three maybe significant issues. One is, of course, we've said there's the resource, because the diasporans are looked as the cash cow. So
Mhm.
we remit quite a lot in the country, and you've seen the impact of that particular remittance. Our argument is that for that particular shilling that is being sent into the country, let
Mm.
that percentage, a big percentage, not go into what we call the social support, because
Yeah.
that's what the government should do, but it should go to investment so that we can create employment and all that. So we have talked about the movement of resources, whether
Mhm.
it's the expertise and so forth that we have. The other one is the networks that we bring in. And of course, as we rightly said, the participation and governance. But where I wanted to fall into is that if you look at the ministry or the State Department of Diaspora that we've been allocated, there are a few things that you could argue have been done well in terms of the care that diasporans are getting probably outside here, and also probably in terms of what it is that they can do, but they can do better. Now, if we come to,
Allow me to engage you, sir. Allow
yeah,
me to engage you. I've listened to your execution of that issue when you talk about the the thing that the current government has been able, the administration of the day has been able to achieve fairly enough. You've talked about the State Department for Diaspora Affairs, and you've been able to correlate on how other countries have been able to harness their diaspora members and the economic and social impact they have had. Now, talking about the Kenyan community living outside Kenya and talking about the current administration investing in the Kenyan community living abroad, you only mentioned the diaspora, State Department for Diaspora Affairs. Is that the best that can happen for any?
no, not at all. I think there are many areas that could have happened better. But let
Let,
me put it in
yeah.
perspective so
Mm.
that we don't get bogged down in somewhere. But let me put it in perspective.
Yeah.
I think for any government that comes in, whether it's the present government, future government that comes in, they have to have what we call the fundamentals, the
Mm.
rule of law that is significant in terms of, and then transparency,
Mm.
and then looking at let's go for merit. because if we have a merit-based society,
Yeah.
more likely it will be fair for all, and it will also be an incentive for others to work hard.
Mm.
But when we don't have a very, if we don't have a merit-based society, and we are rewarding what we call elements that are not necessarily uh, good, and we know very well that maybe that should have been questioned or in some aspect, then I
Mm.
think we are building a society that might not necessarily give us the outcome that we want. The other thing
Mm.
also is the issue around the intergenerational conversation. I think there is a lack of intergenerational conversation, and the late Raila tried his best to really try and reflect back and forth in that intergenerational conversation. But you can
Mm.
see that the country is almost divided into three. So you've got the kind of like the older generation, you've got the middle-aged generation, and you've got the very young, savvy generation who are more than us in terms of population.
Mm.
There has to be a conversation that relates in all aspects, whether it is the rule of law, whether it is respect, whether it is the need to work hard, whether it is rewards for those who work well, and also the need to be able to punish something that is wrong. And that is what we need. And then the truthfulness of
Mm.
people in positions where they are and executing and serving the citizens. In fact, citizens are not asking for a lot of things. We are just saying, let those who have the opportunity to be elected and to be given the powers to lead us
Mm.
in the specific constituency or boroughs or whichever, just serve the people. And the people will be able to reward you back because the point is service. And I think that could be what could be the underlying issue. And then there is also another point that I really wanted to say is the issue
Mm.
around value. We have to instill value in our society. I think I'm not the best out there. I might have my own errors, but I believe you me, we
Yeah.
need to instill value in our society because unless we have value and patriotism, but this only comes with what I call the the merit
Mm.
society that we should build because that merit society will be able to see, well, there is value in doing this, and let us also support those whom we cannot support. And normally what they say is
Yeah.
that a society that takes care of their most vulnerable, it will always be a progressive society. So if you don't take care of your most vulnerable,
Mm.
if we do not have a mechanism to make sure that those who are very vulnerable, the most vulnerable in a society, have something to really hang on so that they don't go beyond and they drop in that particular safety net, I think we are not doing ourselves justice. But the other thing also is just to use our human resource. I think we have a young population, and this
Mm.
young population is yearning for not only the leadership as we know it today, but also for a space to be able to exercise their freedom of thinking, to be able
Mm.
to exercise their right, their peer, the way that they think through specific issues, which might
Mm.
not be the same from generation to generation, but in a very, very organic way. So these are the areas that I think, and I know there are so many people doing some work out there, whether it is the churches,
Yeah.
the mosques and all that, they're doing their bits. But the point is, we just need to go back to the fundamental, the rule of law, uh, remove corruption if that is possible, make sure
Mm.
that we minimize opulence over expenditure, but more importantly, serve the people. Any government of the day, whether the present, future, these are fundamental aspects of it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Koyabe. And I love, the idea of maximizing and taking advantage of not just the resources that we have in terms of human resource, but also capitalizing on the same to achieve or get to the dream that we want to have as a country. And that is a country that is not just fulfilling, but you can feel happy. I don't know when is the last time you felt happy as a Kenyan, Dr. Koyabe. Are you a happy Kenyan?
I think normally when I land in
That's
Kenya
subjective.
and I have that arufu of nyama choma, the smell of
Bwana
nyama
wewe
choma, maybe
unakula
that.
chakula
But no,
tu.
but there are moments that there are moments that the country has done well. I
Mm.
think when you look at some of the even the appointments that have come out,
Mm.
especially like the recent one, where we had one of our own being elected into a UN position. These are moments that are rare outside here. We've seen cases where Kenyans have broken records, whether they are athletes or any others. And even the young girl who was hugging a tree for 72 hours. There's some things that people have done that are very commendable. And of course, leaders who are doing some good work in their constituencies, in their offices, those workers who are actually giving their all. I remember there was one lady, and I know she might be, I don't know where she is, but I'll give you a story. I went to this registrations of birth office, and I
Mm.
found a lady there, and she was trying to process for me my registration of birth for my daughter.
Mm.
And I've never seen a civil servant uh, who gave us a service of that nature and even
Mm.
advised us of how we can go through that process without having a lot of expenditure because we had just come in, we were a big line, and she even worked beyond the time that you expect somebody to be in the office. And for
Yeah.
sure, when she told us to come the next day, that particular birth certificate was ready. I know that lady, wherever she is, I've never seen. So there are specific individuals out there
Mm.
who are very dedicated for service. And I think that is where the root and that is where the umbilical cord of the need to serve, the need to be able to have a country that is cohesive begins from. And I think the value system, in my argument,
Yeah.
would be one area that we need to look at.
Well, that is Dr. Martin Koyabe, who argues value-based leadership. As a Kenyan diaspora, questions keep coming. And one of those main questions is the unnecessary infights or catfights amongst diaspora organizations. And it's fundamental because then it is also one of what I would say an oasis of leadership. These are the very people who will now spring out and want to become the next member of parliament, the next senator, the next president. What exactly is making the diaspora have an image of disunity and unnecessary competition?
Let me be very brutal
I'm
because
asking that
this is a
as a
subject.
diaspora leader
Yeah,
because you are one.
this is a subject that we really wanted to put it out
Mm,
there.
mm,
When you look at the diaspora, we are made up of different layers of
mm,
individuals.
mm,
So, and just to give you an example, you've got professionals, you've got business people, you've got individuals who are here. Some of us are not necessarily with the papers and all that. So there are very many, it's a mixture of individuals who are in the diaspora, but everybody has an aspiration of their own,
yeah.
which they want to satisfy. One of the challenges has been the interface between the diaspora and the government.
Mm,
And the reason I'm saying this is because the government would like a diaspora community that is representative of everybody so that you
mm,
can deal with this community that tells the government what is the problem of everything. Now, one example that we've tried to do in the technical working group, the diaspora
mm,
technical working group, is to make sure that we only handle issues that face the diaspora, irrespective of your party, irrespective of your tribe, irrespective
mm,
of whatever status you are, you would want to exercise your right to vote.
mm,
You would want to exercise your right to be part of the governance structure of the country. So the point is, we looked at a neutral platform that does not have any affiliation, whether it is party affiliation and others, to
mm,
get an issue-based society. So to have a structure that can be able to be of that kind, but expansive enough in various countries is not easy. So
yeah.
one challenge that I know, and even the State Department of Diaspora accepts, is to create that structure that can be able to interface between the diaspora and the government, especially with what we call an unbiased way.
Mm,
What
mm,
we have today are communities, interest groups, and others that are constantly interfacing. And I'm not saying they're not doing their best. They're doing their best because they come with a good objective and then they want to do that. What we've tried to propose is to see how to create a structure that can have, so for example, let's take a country in Europe that has diasporians in that particular country. Would it be possible to have a structure that says one person can be able to campaign and be able to be elected, just the same way we nominate people for whichever country got talent? We go to these talent shows and vote, and we get a winner. So we can actually get winners for the diaspora, but they have to be people who are compensated, because what happens, the problem that you just mentioned, is because we have conflict of interest where, because I'm a diaspora representative and my community or my interest is in this particular space, I will always fight for that particular interest when I'm engaging with the government. And not all of us might be your member. So you have already left a good chunk of us outside. And that's why there has to be a recalibration. I know that if you look at the State Department of Diaspora Policy, there is this formation of a summit.
Yeah.
And that formation of a summit, and I've commented on it publicly, it needs some rethinking. Okay. And we've made these sentiments very clear to the State Department. We've actually said that the idea is good, but it requires a bit of thinking, because you can imagine the diaspora would want to have its own leadership structure so that it can engage with the government. Because if, let's say, the government selects somebody to be our leader, the diaspora will not be, the diaspora would want to have their own leader or their own person.
I mean,
to
you
be
know
able
why
to,
I'm asking that?
when I say leader, just get me clearly, is a representation,
Mm.
that is quite unique. So anyway, the idea around the summit needs to be rethought. That one we know. There could be ways that we can start as in a smaller way, then expand it to other countries. But each country requires a structure that interfaces clearly with the government or even with the embassy without necessarily infringing other people's interest. That is the key. So that structure is needed, whether it sits within the summit that is proposed in the SDDA policy document. That is where we may want to really put some input into it. But the idea of having a summit that collates all the leaders of each particular region or country is a good idea. But we have some ideas of how this can be achieved without necessarily having the friction and the conflict of interest that we see from time to time.
I'm reading a comment here that is coming from our X space, and for everyone that is joining on X, in case you missed the first part of the recording, it's available on our X broadcast. Those are two different stuff, because we had a lot of technical hitches on that line. But allow me to read this, Dr. Martin. This is from New
Sure.
Kenya, a Lego gang, who says Kenyan politicians are the same. The occurrence in Kenyan politics is the same. Only the actors keep changing. And that's why I was asking about this whole issue of the diaspora leadership and the diaspora associations. And you said it's all about the interest. How do we stop from having divided interest to a common uniting interest? And I talk this with a lot of, caution, because I know interest will always arise. But Dr. Martin, with your experience being a leader outside the Kenyan boundaries, leading Kenyans, is there anything that can unite Kenyans once and for all?
I think there is. I'll argue that way. There is.
I'm talking matters politically.
You have to really look at it from different perspectives. But as they say, there has to be a common denominator. And it's not difficult, if you ask me, because like right now, when you look at our country, the resources are not going to be abundant as we knew them before. So there's a need for us to be prudent. There's a need for us to be able to think about the future. There's a need for us to be able to put things in perspective. But there's also a need for us to bring what we call decorum and discipline in terms of how we apprehend specific situations. Why is it that when we leave our society and come to the diaspora, We tend to follow the law. We put on our safety belts. We drive in a speed limit. We don't drink and drive. We don't. Why would that happen? Just because you're in a specific environment? No. It's because
Mm.
the repercussions are so punitive that you would rather go the other way and save yourself for the next day. So the
Yeah.
way we implement our laws and how we exercise and bring justice where it's required, it's also a kind of like a fabrication of
Mm.
this issue of consolidating people into one solid state in terms of how we can be able to come together because we know that we are all protected. So the idea around the law working for all, that could also be
Mm.
an argument that should be there. The
Mm.
idea that people can be able to get their rightful service when they want to, and it's not only diasporians, but even citizens in terms of what they need. If you look probably at the roads that we have, if we are paying taxes to go somewhere for a specific development, and if that development is taking place as per the taxes we've paid, nobody will have any qualm in paying those taxes. We've seen those societies out here where people pay taxes and those
Yeah.
taxes go to the specific areas, and you can see where the work is being done. So there are
Mm.
specific issues that we need to bring into the forefront. Now, your argument is as good as mine that why is it that this is a continuous problem? And to come back to the question that has been asked about politicians, I don't want
Yeah.
to castigate politicians, but politicians are just like us. We're all
Mm.
human and we are
Mm.
all people. But we've seen there are a class of politicians that every Kenyan today will agree that that politician, whether he or she is doing the right thing, they are pushing for legislation, they are pushing for specific things for their community, they are doing the right thing for their community, they are consolidating. We've got no shortage of these people. They are there and they are doing it. So even with the situation that we have in the country, there is still an example that you can point
Mm.
out that somebody somewhere is doing the right thing for his or her people. And there's somebody who is putting and articulating issues, whether in parliament floor, on the floor of the parliament, or even in public, that is actually resonating with the people. So we need to make sure that those exemplary cases are things that we should put at heart and encourage many people to do that. The problem is that if you're existing in another environment and you've got these issues, then you have that issue. I don't want to be political because this is a platform that shouldn't be political at all, but we should actually talk of the principles of leadership. So,
Mm.
and there are people out there who are doing the right thing, whether it's their civil servants, whether they are people who are working in offices, whether they are drivers, whether they're dealing with children, whether they're dealing with the elderly, even in hospitals, whether they're doctors. There are people who are actually doing the right thing. So the question is, how do we support them with the system so that the
Mm.
system is more supportive for that? So I think the level of integration and how we bring this into the fabrics of the society is important. But politicians also carry a very, very important role, especially when they are seen not to do what they are expected to do,
Mm.
and it just goes scot-free. I think that hurts a lot of people, and people don't feel very good, especially when they get away with specific things that you and I can never get away from. So I think that's where we have this kind of despondence and the issue around, well, everybody for themselves, God for us all. But to avoid that, I think we need to bring that kind of decorum within how we work, especially with the politicians.
I agree with you. There are a lot of things that we need to work around. But I also agree with one of the viewers who is Judy tells me um, the thing that unites Kenyans ni sherehe. Ikikuja kwa hizo zingine zote, we are as divided as ever. Maybe we should just have celebrations and parties throughout. But now the problem is there are too many parties that are political.
I was in where was I? I was in South Africa recently, and we happened to have been in a meeting where we had various people from different countries.
Mm.
Initially, our brothers and sisters from Zambia were the ones who were known to be ordering beer, and they would put their foot on top of a crate
Mm.
just to make sure that they have enough stock. Having mentioned that, but I think the Kenyan society has just gone beyond
Mm.
it's breaking a lot of records. But
Mm.
you could also look at this as a problem in the society because uh, where else do you where else do you take the pressure
mm,
and frustration? It is through these avenues.
mm,
So the society, we need to look at the society with another angle, and I'm sure there are so many psychologists out there
mm,
who might have studied these trends, and there's something that relates these kind of trends with what we are calling the burnout of individuals, because you cannot just contain specific scenarios. And I'm not saying that people should go and drink
mm,
excessively, and I'm not saying that people shouldn't drink. I mean, people have a right to do what they want, but in a moderate way. But when you
mm,
have an excessive level of this, it can also be a reflection of the society. We've seen it in specific societies where there's excessive drinking, where people are going into this kind of miadaratis and
mm,
there was a Koyabe and so forth. So we see this from time to time. But the point is that we really have to have that consciousness of our society, because that could also be a barometer that indicates something within the society that might not be right. So we need to
I
really
mean,
balance and
I
see what
totally agree with you, Dr. Ari, when you talk about something is not right. And it boils down, should I say up, to the issue of the leadership we are providing. There's a joke that used to be told, and I know you know this joke. It is not a joke, but it's a joke because it becomes a meme in the Kenyan eye. It's called Serikali Saidia. Tafadhali ambia serikali. Now, for a minute, I thought it was a very simplistic way of resolving and solving issues. But when you look at it, there's actually a reason why governments do exist. There's also a reason why people expect a lot from their governments. Have we failed the populace as leaders?
Actually, you've raised a very important point, and let me try and give you a perspective that might maybe relate to this. There was a time when, in my discussion with various friends, some of them are politicians in this environment, and some of them are actually very, influential policymakers whom I deal
Mm,
with from day to day, and some of them are government officials, leaders. And one term that kept coming up was the word God, as in God. And I thought it was the God that
mm,
the one that we always go to church, and whether it's the mosque or whatever, that we
mm.
pray for. But there's something that they have in these societies. God to them is government of the day. So
Okay.
the government of the day is the one that they hold dearly and accountable to be able to perform, so that if it doesn't deliver, it is out. If it delivers, it is given another chance. So
Mm,
they really, really make sure that they understand what is it that that government of the day has promised. What
mm,
is it that that government of the day told them it will deliver? How do we hold that government of the day accountable? And when you look at these societies, they do that very vigorously
mhm,
within the law. In some cases, of course, there are cases where they are exceptional, but in many cases within the law, we've seen cases where it can go very bad if you
mhm,
don't have the law working on it. But if you relate that and you see exactly what we have, because anything the government does affects our lives. From
mhm,
birth, you get a birth certificate, you get a marriage certificate, it's the government there. You die, you get a death certificate, it's still the government. So the government really affects, and politics affects our lives.
mm,
So we, as the voters, and this is a lesson to voters out there, we should be able to look and see
mm,
who are the people that we want. In fact, there was a joke. It's not actually a joke. I was being told this by a very old woman somewhere in the village. She was actually saying why uh, we are very bad voters. So she was relating this and saying that when you want to go and buy a mbuzi during Christmas, and rarely do you go and just pick a mbuzi and just to say, okay, this is the one we're going to go for Christmas, whether it's
mm,
chicken or mbuzi. You take the fat one, the one that you know it's strong, but you know
mm,
you're going to kill it. It's going to, sorry to use this kind of very strong terms
mm,
here for those of us who may not be the vegetarians out there. But the
mm,
point is that you know that this animal will be sacrificed in a way for a meal,
mm,
which is very sacrosanct in some societies. But we make sure that we choose the best, that has enough meat, that looks, the skin is lean, that it doesn't look, maybe
Mm.
sick. So you
Yeah.
go and choose the best. So why is it that we can't do that for our politicians? We know that they're going to lead us for 5 years. Why is it that we can't go and choose that? Now, somebody can come and argue that the middle class is always not the one that has a problem. They're playing golf instead of going to vote. It's
Mm.
only the guys at the bottom who go to the, from Chujo. They're the ones who
Mm.
choose these people to come to the ballot. So by the time we are going to vote, we are going to vote for people who have already been chosen by another class of citizens. So you
Mhm.
could look at it in that argument. But the point is that participation in elections, participation in choosing leaders, could also be another way. But also within ourselves, we should be able to rally around individuals who are principled, individuals whom we know can deliver, even if they go in as independent.
Mhm.
Then you choose them, or even if they go in as a party. So I think the way we associate the aftermath of our leadership plus what we do in terms of vetting,
Yeah.
I think there's some wanting there. So we need to be choosing that goat that can deliver, the goat that we know that it will be good for that particular meal, that it will serve us, so that when we have the visitors, we are not ashamed that we cooked the wrong food. But the point is, we need to get that coming. And I'm not having any go at any other person, but the point is that the electorate have to be kind of like they should have that kind of a sixth sense or seventh sense, so to make it to say, but they have to have the ability to vet and know who are the leaders who are coming in.
I'm afraid I just lost you. Okay, you're back. Now, Dr. Martin, we have 4 minutes shy to
Sure.
come to the conclusion of this talk. It has been very, very healthy discussing, the political intrigues of what a voter and the registration as one might mean to you or could actually mean when it comes to the political tapestry and how your social economic life will be affected. And therefore, if you missed out on the initial part of this conversation, do not worry. We will have this tape rerun on our platform, so you can always listen in and get also a copy of the recording to just listen if daktari was actually injecting ama yeye ndio mgonjwa, because sometimes you might just be walking into a sick patient's home and imagine you are getting treated, but since it's not a medical one, I think we are safe. Um, Dr. Martin,
Sure.
we talked about the common issues that unite us and separate us in one way or another, and very political for that matter. Kenyans at one point pointed out they were tired of the Moi regime and they needed a breather, if not change. Kenyans right now on the street saying you must be Kadi if you want to change the conversation of leadership in this country. Will 2027 redefine leadership, or is it just another euphoria that will come to pass? And what role do the young people in this country have in enhancing not just leadership, but adopting the change they badly desire? Speak to them.
Yeah, I think you've raised a very important point in terms of where we are going. Um, First of all, I can't predict that what will happen in 2027 vis-a-vis what happened in 2022. But the key thing that I know is that I think the electorate keeps learning as time goes. And I
Yeah.
think that to me is one point that we can take forward as a very positive point when you look at the electorate. But let
Mm.
me focus a little bit on the young people because I think that's where we are seeing a lot of focus. Number one is the young people, especially in Kenya and even in Africa and the rest of the world. We've seen that in Nepal and other parts of the world. I think young people are organically driven.
Mhm.
That's the first thing because um, they are they are able to spearhead their own ambition through their influences, whether it's their activism, but it's more or less a very peer related. It's a peer-to-peer mobilization that we are
Yeah.
seeing among the young people, and then they're using technology to make
Mm.
sure that they enhance that peer-to-peer mobilization. They are also what we call they're kind of like defining what I would call the fusion between civic duty with the digital culture. And I like one young man, and I know there are many of them, young men and women in Kenya, who are very, very focused in terms of bringing what we call the understanding of civic education, but in a very simplified way.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a young person, I think he's written even a book where he's actually training people to understand this thing. And this is a very interesting phenomenon that we are seeing.
Yeah.
Fusion of technology, where you have the civic education. And they're using specific platforms. So when you look at even the issue around whether it's the use of specific social media platforms, whether it's TikTok, Facebook, or any other platform that is there, whether even and any other, even Snapchat and so forth. There's a lot of energy that is being exuded by young
Yeah.
people in terms of what they want in terms of their focus, and they're not
Yeah.
afraid to be able to say, "Look, that doesn't work for us, and we don't really care." So they use kind of like very sharp language. So that's number one. So
Yeah.
the idea around the fundamental difference that we are seeing between the past civic education approaches and how it leverages is that we are seeing this social validation. Young people are concentrating on social validation. We are seeing the influencer culture playing a part because I've got this number of followers. I can influence even up to the point of what they eat or even
Yeah.
what they wear and even where
Yeah.
they stay. And then there's also the gamification of participation. So it's like we are in for the numbers. Where
Mm.
we see a little bit of an issue is how you translate that into what we call a political decision-making process. Because
Mm-hmm.
that decision-making process requires you to go and cast your vote, as the Constitution says today. That process requires you to have a party that you can be able to vote for or not vote or vote against. So
Mm.
therefore, there are specific issues that have to be reconciled within the energy that we see. And then
Yeah.
to translate this energy into action, as I said, could be one of the most powerful aspects of this initiative that is being pioneered by the young people. And when I say young, they always say it should just be young in mind, not necessarily in
Oh,
age, because we've got even older folks who are really, really doing their best
and you're
to
planning
be
to
part of
die
that
in
particular equation.
2072. That's why you want to stay young in
And then, of
mind.
course, this will bring sort of like the gap between online activism that we are seeing and then the real world
Mm.
participation that we see. So, in summary, the way I'm seeing is that we are seeing the idea around Tuko Kadi, ama Niko Kadi. It's what you call an organic way of young people saying,
Mm.
I have that bit that
Mm.
you've been looking for, and I will
Mm.
try and exercise it on that
Mm.
particular day. And that is a big promise that they're taking because remember, the Kenya of today belongs to the young people because they're the ones who will be the ones governing the country in years to come based on the situation that they're seeing. And they wouldn't want probably to repeat the same mistake that they've seen either us or the people who come before us do. But we need also to be cognizant of the fact that they need to be given that space, but create an ecosystem that allows for that freedom to be expressed because that freedom brings innovation, innovation brings services, services bring employment, and employment, as we all know, creates a social economic society that is vibrant. And these are things that are very fundamental for the society. So we need to really embrace that as we go ahead. I know we've got some of us who don't give any space for what the
Mm.
young people are thinking today, just because of what they're seeing online. But I think we need to give them space. So coming back to your point, I think that's one way. Tukokadi is just one of what we call the movements that are gluing the young people in order to go and get their vote. And I
Mm.
think if they can continue with that, IEBC has put a mark of 2.5 million, which is the target. It's quite an ambitious target. It's spending roughly about 1.1 billion Kenya shillings at the moment just to
Mm.
make sure that this enhancement the voter registration process takes place. So I think there's quite a lot that is banked on that. But what I would urge young people out there, based on this particular discussion, is
Yeah.
please go and get yourself registered, get your votes, get your voter's card. Make sure that you know exactly where you're going to vote. And please, 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 if you're a young person out there, wake up that morning and go and cast your vote. You have to make sure that you do that. And if you are a young person who can also be able to vie, so be it. You can stand, you can vie, and this process is there. Whether you want to vie as an independent because you don't believe in somebody leading you, that is fine. So I think there's room for having this energy that you're talking about to come there. But back to the diaspora, remember, we also have young people in the diaspora. The fourth, fifth generation of some of the diasporans might not necessarily have a Kenyan passport, they might not have a Kenyan ID, but these are people who are Kenyan by blood. So when we are talking about young people, please, we need to consider that generation that can be very vital for Kenya in future because they are highly trained. They've gone to some of the best universities in the world. They've got some of the best skills that are needed in future, such as AI and so forth. They can be very useful resource for the Kenyan government if they think carefully around that. We know societies whereby if you can track your lineage through one or two grandfathers, you're a citizen of that country. So I think the government has to think not only of the young people in the country, but my argument is that they have to think of young people outside the country because they too have a right, if they wish to be part of that particular ecosystem. And I think the Kenyan government can benefit quite a lot from these particular people if they consider them, because they too have a right through their lineage, whether it's through their grandfather, their father, their great-great-grandfather, to be part of that particular society. And we shouldn't assume that they've gone forever. So that's the message that I can have when it comes to 2027 and also the young people as they progress through.
Interesting, Dr. Martin. Dr. Martin Koyabe is a Kenyan leader based in the UK and also a leader when it comes to matters diaspora. He, of course, is passionate about technology. And more important, he loves his country because of how he speaks about his country and what he says about his country. But then also takes us to another different angle of understanding the interconnection between the young people, technology, and last but not least, the hunger that we have for better leaders. And that's why Dr. Martin Ken is telling us let us differentiate politician, a leader, and an activist. Who are you?
This is a good question, but I've tried very much to steer away from either and try to be neutral. But I think some of us have been very passionate in trying to contribute the best that we can for the country. And I know I'm talking to so many of us who have been in the diaspora, maybe for long or even for some time. But what we are pushing, and I'll just give two initiatives that we are doing. Like right now, I am working through the technical working group. We are now focusing on how the diaspora can contribute to Konza, which is a very important area because we know that Konza is looking for investors left, right, and center. They're looking for people to come in, but the diaspora has just an answer at their fingertips for the problems that Konza could be facing, whether it's challenges. So we need to find a framework of how we can engage with Konza, especially at the micro level. So you can imagine you're a diasporian, you're a surgeon, you are based somewhere in the world, and you want to contribute to Konza. But there's no space of how you can engage because you can't engage as an individual. You only engage as a company and you're given this. But I know these are the discussions that we're taking. So we've taken that challenge to see how best can we leverage and contribute to a technological hub such as Konza, which is the digital savannah in Africa, to have diasporans have a base in there. I know this is something that we are talking with the State Department of Diaspora to see how we can enhance that. The other aspect that we are bringing on board, and I know this is something that we are waiting for, we've pushed quite a lot in terms of the issue around voter registration. We have tried to make sure that the diaspora has what we call the right to be able to have many voting polling stations for them to be able to expand their democratic right, to exercise the democratic right. And also, we hope that the dialogue that we are trying to focus on, which is coming up in May with the IEBC, will try and flash out some of the challenges that we've just expressed and how we can engage further. So there are some things that we are doing right now. We are not just talking, but we are trying to work on it. And remember, all this is voluntary. So it's not that we are being paid or there's somebody.
Mmepewa pesa unigawie.
Yeah, so we are doing this. And I know there's so many other diaspora groups out there that are doing a lot of fantastic work,
Mm.
whether individually, as a community, and even to serve very many people. So just to come back to the point, is that we need to talk the talk, but at the same time walk the walk, so that we can be able to at least show that exemplary. So we are trying to make sure that the brain drain that has
Mm.
bedeviled
Mm.
our country for a long time is something that the country can benefit back by bringing some what you call sanity and a way that diasporans can be able to contribute directly, especially in areas of technology, whether it is biomedicine, whether it is in engineering, whether it's in agriculture,
Yeah.
and other aspects that we know of.
Interesting. And definitely, Dr. Martin, thank you very much for making time to join us in this conversation. In your week in brief, we've been able to look into very many issues when it comes to the diaspora and their contribution to their country. So, Yesu amesulubishwa
Kweli.
na tunaenda kupotea for 3 days. Where are you headed to?
Actually, I'm really, because we are very lucky a little bit in Europe that there's a little bit of sunshine. I know Kenyans don't see sunshine in Europe as anything,
Yeah.
but yeah, escaping a little bit from the normal
Mm.
hustle and bustle will be good. We might go with my daughter to a small town,
Mm.
just to tour a little bit and then come back because she's also preparing for her exams, and therefore we'll take a short break and then do that. As I said, we only travel when necessary because the world is a bit expensive. We know that there are challenges,
Yeah.
especially with our brothers and sisters in the Middle East.
Mm.
We really put them in our prayer, and we know that we hope that that war that is going on will calm down so that it can allow they too to see their relatives. So we know this is not easy around the world. But yes, as they said, we wish everybody a merry, actually not a merry one, but a blessed Easter.
Happy
And also,
Easter. Get some eggs, paint them, and above all,
absolutely, absolutely, I'm going to look for some eggs. But
yeah,
thank you so much. We
tell
really
your little
appreciate it.
girl that
Yes, they
Mimi
do that
kama
quite a lot
uncle,
here.
Mimi kama uncle, I wish her the best in her exams. And of course, as you contribute to the Kenyans in diaspora, all the best, success, and
Asante.
above all, let's get those 2.5 million Kenyans registered.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately,
Uh,
it will not be happening in the diaspora, but I'm hoping in the next budget they'll consider it very fast because the budget will be out in June. And I thought government has approved quite a significant, not government, but parliament has adopted the proposals. But let's
Yeah, my
let's
understanding is that they were asking for 63 billion. Parliament approved. I think they said they were going to cap it to 43 billion. So IBC will have to rejig
Mm.
themselves to see what is it that is of priority. We hope that this dialogue that we shall have with the IBC will bring out some maybe forthrightness, but also some direction in terms of what can be done, what cannot be done. But hopefully, we shall give them something. And if you're a diasporan out there,
Mm.
please look out for that particular dialogue. You can always get a link somewhere and you can go register. That will be very important for us to be able to talk to IEBC in an open forum.
Well, you just fell shy of saying Court FM will be one of the main media
Yes,
partners
indeed.
for
Thank
this
you.
event
Thank you very
that you
much for
would
hosting us.
do not
Yes,
want to
actually, that was
recognize,
very
but
good.
we shall be there. We
Actually, that's very good. We hope to see you there. But yeah, as you've done very well, and thank you so much because Court FM,
Mm.
you've really been behind the diaspora, and we
Yeah.
know you do quite a lot of work out there, which is very commendable. And hopefully, during the dialogue, we can have more of those dialogues
Yeah.
in future. But the idea is to really have a voice for the diasporians to exercise their right to vote and also to participate in government development.
Correct. Of course, we have been speaking to Dr. Martin Koyabe, who is a Kenyan diaspora leader based in the UK and also one of the members of Kenya Diaspora Technical Working Group, also known as Diaspora Technical Working Group. And, Dr. Martin, well, ukimaliza mambo yako ya 3 days away, I'll be also, be going for some off as
Oh,
midnight, but I stay
great.
around for more entertainment. As Kenyans, we love entertainment. So if you're logging out of this session, just take your radio. Mi najua you have this habit of working not with a Walkman, but with the radio, and switch
Sure.
on to www.kotfm.co.ke. Let's have a good time. And for those of you who have been watching us on X, the broadcast will be coming to an end, but we continue live on KotFM website. That is kotfm.co.ke. Good evening, and tupatane pia ndani ya TikTok. Thank you for coming, Dr. Martin.
And thank you for having me, and for your listeners out there, please, all the best during this Easter, and take care of yourselves and each other. Thank you. I
Asante
really
sana.
appreciate it.
Thank you
Asante.
so much. All
Thank
right.
you.